I got kicked out at 15. The powerful, well-connected group paid for my education. And my parents still think I owe them. If you've ever wondered what happens to a kid who's treated like a trial run instead of a son, here you go. I'm 32 now. I wear suits, argue in court, and get called sir by people who don't know I used to sleep behind a laundromat at 15, wondering if freezing to death would be quieter than going home. I was adopted as a baby. I didn't find out in some gentle, we chose you family moment either. I found out the way you find out a lot of ugly things in that house, by accident, and then by punishment for knowing. I was 13 when I overheard my mother on the phone saying, "He's not really ours. We did a good thing, but he's difficult." Like I was a defective donation. When I confronted them, my father didn't deny it. He didn't sit me down. He didn't explain. He just stared at me like I'd found the stain he'd been scrubbing at for years and said, "You should be grateful." Grateful. That word became their favorite weapon. If I got a B, kids with your background should be grateful we even keep you in school. If I asked to go to a friend's house, grateful kids don't ask for more. If I cried, stop it. You're lucky to be here. They crossed lines no parents should cross. I'm not going to describe it in detail, because I know how red it is. People either turn it into a trauma Olympics or accuse you of exaggerating. All I'll say is this. I learned early how to walk softly, how to listen for the difference between footsteps that meant neutral and footsteps that meant danger. I learned how to endure things no child should have to endure without making noise, because making noise turned one hit into 10. My parents weren't monsters 24/7. That's what messed with me. They could smile in public. They could host barbecues. They could joke with neighbors. They could post family photos where my arm was always slightly tugged closer, as if they were proving I belonged. But when the door closed, I was a receipt. Proof they'd done something good. Something they could point to. At 15, I finally did the thing you're not supposed to do when you live with people like that. I fought back. Not physically. I wasn't stupid. My father had 40 pounds on me and a temper like a lit match. I fought back with words. I said something like, "You don't get to treat me like trash and still call yourselves my parents." I still remember the way my mother's face changed, like she'd been waiting for an excuse to stop pretending. My father grabbed me by the collar, shoved me toward the front door, and said, "Fine, leave, since you hate it here so much." I thought it was a threat, a scare tactic. Then he opened the door, tossed my backpack after me. No coat, no money, no phone, and said, "Don't come back." And that was it. 15 years old, standing on the porch in cheap sneakers, watching the only house I'd ever known become a locked wall. I knocked. I begged. I promised I'd be grateful. My mother didn't even come to the door. I slept that night behind a convenience store because it had a light, and I was terrified of the dark. My stomach hurt so badly I thought I was sick, but it was just hunger and adrenaline and the sudden understanding that nobody was coming. The first week was the worst. Not because of the cold, though that was brutal. Not even because of the hunger, though it made me dizzy and mean. The worst part was the way the world looked at me. Adults didn't see kid. They saw a problem. They saw a thief. They saw a bad decision. I learned where to find the warm air vents. I learned which businesses threw out food that wasn't rotten yet. I learned quickly that not every system knows how to help kids like me. I wondered. That's the only word for it. Like a ghost with a backpack and a growing anger that felt too big for my ribs. Then, one night, I got caught trying to warm my hands in the exhaust of a parked car behind a diner. A man's voice behind me said, "Calm as a library. That'll burn you if you're not careful." I spun around ready to run. He was old, 70s, maybe, tall but thin, wearing a nice coat like he belonged in a different world. His hair was silver, his eyes sharp. He didn't look scared of me. He didn't look disgusted either. He looked curious, like I was a puzzle, not a stain. "Where's your family?" he asked. I lied. "Dead." I don't know why I said it. It just came out because they threw me out, felt pathetic, and pathetic gets you stepped on. He didn't flinch. He just nodded once, as if filing it away. "What's your name?" he asked. I hesitated. Then Eli. Not my real name. I wasn't giving strangers ammunition. He smiled a little, like he knew, and said, "Eli, you hungry?" I should have said no. Every survival instinct screamed trap. But hunger is louder than instincts when you're 15 and your body is chewing on itself. He bought me soup and bread and didn't ask questions while I ate like an animal. Then he slid a napkin across the table and said, You can sleep at my place tonight. On the couch. Door stays unlocked. You try anything, you'll regret it. The way he said it wasn't threatening. It was factual, like gravity. I followed him. His house was old money. Not flashy, but heavy. Solid furniture, framed photos, a quiet that felt expensive. He gave me a towel, pointed me toward the shower, and said, "You're a kid. First rule of surviving. Don't smell like you've given up." I stood under that hot water so long my skin turned red, and I cried without making a sound because I didn't know what else to do with the feeling of being warm. He let me stay one night, then another, then a week. He introduced himself as Victor. Victor didn't talk much about his past, but people came by the house. Men in nice coats, women with tight smiles, quiet footsteps, respectful voices. They called him sir without irony. They didn't ask who I was, but they looked at me like they were measuring my future. I wasn't stupid. I'd seen movies. I'd heard whispers. One evening, I was wiping down the kitchen counter, trying to be useful, when Victor said, casually, "You know what I am, right?" My hands went still. I said, carefully, "You're connected." Victor chuckled. That's one word for it. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at me like he was deciding whether to keep a stray dog. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Why are you on the street?" I could have lied again. I could have said my parents died. I could have said I ran away because of a girlfriend. Something that made me look like a hero. But I was tired. So I told him. I told him I was adopted. I told him my parents never loved me, not in the way love is supposed to feel. I told him about the signs I learned to keep private, the way they talked about me like a burden, the way grateful meant quiet. I told him how my father opened the door and threw me out like trash. When I finished, Victor was quiet for a long time. Then he said, softly, "They thought you were disposable." Something in my throat tightened, and I couldn't speak. Victor stood up, walked to a cabinet, and poured himself a drink I was definitely too young to have. Then he said, "Come with me." He led me into a room I hadn't been in before, an office with a big desk and a painting that looked like it cost more than my entire life. There were 3 men inside already. They stood when Victor entered. He didn't introduce me like a kid. He introduced me like a subject. "This is Eli," he said. "He's going to be living here." One of the men, broad shoulders, expensive watch, looked me up and down. "Why?" Victor's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Because I said so." Another man, younger, with a scar near his eyebrow, asked me, "Can you read?" I blinked. "Yeah." "Can you fight?" I shook my head. "Not really." He smirked like that was amusing. Victor's voice cut through the room. "He doesn't need to fight. He needs to learn." Then Victor turned to me. "Tell them what you told me." My stomach dropped. I didn't want to. These weren't social workers. These weren't teachers. These were people with influence. But Victor watched me with that sharp patience, and I realized something. This was a test. Not of toughness, of honesty. So I told them again. Everything. Adoption. Abuse. The door shutting behind me. When I finished, the man with the expensive watch said, "You want revenge?" I thought about my father's face, my mother's silence, the cold porch, and I surprised myself by saying, "I want out. I want a life that doesn't belong to them." Victor smiled. "Good answer." The younger man with the scar leaned forward. "You willing to work for it?" "Yes." "What kind of work?" he asked, eyes glinting. Victor set his glass down with a soft click. "Not that kind." That was the first time I understood. Victor wasn't offering me a gang. He was offering me a structure, a ladder, a way to become untouchable in a world that had treated me like a punching bag. Victor looked at the men. They decided to support my education. The man with the watch raised an eyebrow. A kid. Victor didn't even blink. A future. That night, I slept on Victor's couch with a blanket that smelled like clean laundry, and for the first time since I was 15, I didn't dream about my parents. I dreamed about a classroom. And the next morning, Victor slid a piece of paper across the table. Enrollment information for a private school I'd never even heard of. He said, "You're going to study. You're going to keep your head down. And you're going to become something they can't ignore." Then he added, almost gently, "And you're going to stop thinking the way they taught you to think." I stared at the paper, hands shaking. "Why?" I asked. "Why help me?" Victor's eyes softened for half a second. "Because no kid deserves to be thrown away." Then the softness vanished. "And because I hate waste." I didn't fully understand what he meant by that until later. They paid for my future and collected my parents' pride as interest. Private school felt like being dropped into a different species of human. The kids wore expensive shoes and complained about their parents' vacation homes. They talked about SAT tutors like they were normal. They casually assumed their future was guaranteed, like gravity. I was the kid with the thrift store backpack, the too short haircut, and the instinct to flinch when a hand moved too fast. Victor's people handled everything behind the scenes. They got me documents, a new address, a story that didn't raise questions. Nothing dramatic, just tidy, clean, the kind of clean people trust. Victor made one rule that mattered more than anything. You do not use my name. You do not mention my business. You keep your mouth shut. Then he added, and you do not break the law for me. If you want a life, you earn it with your brain, not your fists. So I did. I studied like my survival depended on it, because it did. I didn't have parents to fall back on. I didn't have a room at home, waiting for me if I failed. I had Victor's couch. And even though Victor rarely said, "I'm proud of you," he did something better. He expected things from me. He treated me like I could become someone. That alone rewired my brain in ways therapy probably charges by the hour to achieve. The men around Victor, the ones I'd first met in the office, became this odd, quiet support system. One would drop off textbooks like it was no big deal. One would make sure I had a suit for debate competitions. One would sit in the back of the auditorium during my first public speaking event like a silent shadow. They never clapped loudly. They never embarrassed me. They just showed up. I learned later that, in their world, showing up meant commitment. When college applications rolled around, I didn't even know where to start. My adoptive parents weren't going to co-sign anything. They didn't even know where I was. And even if they did, they would have laughed in my face before slamming the door again. Victor sat me down with a folder. Inside were application fees, scholarship resources, a list of universities circled in red ink. He said, "Pick 3. I stared at him. "I can't afford." Victor cut me off. "Stop speaking like you're still begging at their table." I swallowed. Okay, that folder, plus Victor's connections, got me into college. Not the kind of handshake and you're in thing. More like doors that would have stayed closed quietly unlocked. Scholarships appeared that I didn't remember applying for. A financial aid office suddenly became very helpful. An alumni mentor took an interest in me. If you've never been poor, you might not understand how surreal it is when the world stops saying no to you. I called Victor from my dorm room the day I got accepted. "I got in," I said, voice cracking. Victor was quiet. Then, "Good. And after a beat, don't waste it." That was his version of affection. In college, I worked part-time, studied full-time, and carried this constant fear that the floor would drop out again. Because when you've been thrown away once, your nervous system acts like it can happen anytime. I didn't party. I didn't drink much. I didn't date seriously. I kept my life small and controlled. But I found something that made me feel powerful in a way fists never could. The law. In my first intro course, the professor talked about rights, obligations, duty, negligence, structures that decided who wins and who loses. And all I could think was, if I'd understood this sooner, maybe they couldn't have hurt me so easily. So I went all in. When I told Victor the first wanted to go to law school, he stared at me for a long time and asked, "Why?" I said, "Because I never want to be helpless again." Victor nodded once. "Then you'll be very good at it." Law school was brutal. It was also addictive. Every case felt like a puzzle with consequences. Every debate felt like training for a world that used to swallow kids like me. Victor's people made sure tuition wasn't what broke me. They didn't hand me stacks of cash like a movie. It was always clean, always indirect, always wrapped in paperwork and plausible explanations. I still worked, because I needed to feel like I earned my seat. But I wasn't drowning. And then, because life loves irony, circumstances caught up with my adoptive parents. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know it was coming. One winter break, I came back to Victor's house, older, sharper, carrying law books like armor. He poured himself a drink and said, casually, "Your parents called around." My stomach flipped. "They what?" Victor's mouth twitched. "Seems they miss you." I laughed, but it came out bitter. "They don't miss me. They miss control." Victor watched me. "You want them punished?" I thought about it. And here's the truth that surprises people. I didn't feel rage anymore. Not hot rage. Not revenge fantasy rage. I felt emptiness. I said, "I don't care what happens to them." Victor nodded like that was the answer he wanted. And then he said, "Good. Then you won't make stupid choices. A week later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my adoptive father had lost his position. Some restructuring. Some unfortunate optics. Suddenly, he wasn't the guy in the high-paying role with the smug laugh. And my adoptive mother? The woman who used silence like a knife? She had to pick up work too. Nothing glamorous. Just real life. Budgeting. Stress. The kind of life they always pretended they were above. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what networks I didn't fully understand. I didn't ask. Victor didn't volunteer details. But I understood the message. Actions have long-term consequences. It wasn't about violence. It wasn't about threats. It was about consequence. And then my life kept moving. I graduated. Passed the bar. Got hired. The first time someone called me counselor, I nearly laughed because 15-year-old me would have assumed that title belonged to someone born in a house with two parents who liked him. I built my career quietly. No flashy social media posts. No bragging. Just work. Just cases. Just the steady satisfaction of being the guy people call when they need help. Then, one afternoon, my receptionist buzzed me. "There are two people here asking to see you," she said. "They say they're your parents." I froze so hard my fingers went numb. I told her to send them in. They walked into my office like they belonged there, like my life was still a room they could enter whenever they felt like it. My adoptive father looked older, less powerful. His suit didn't fit right anymore. My adoptive mother's hair was grayer, her eyes sharper in that desperate way people get when they need something but don't want to admit it. My father smiled first. Eli. Hearing him say my name, like he was entitled to it, made my stomach twist. I didn't stand. I didn't offer a handshake. I just said, "What do you want?" My mother tried the soft voice. The "we're family" voice. "We've been worried about you." I stared at her. "No, you haven't." My father cleared his throat. "We had hard times. We made mistakes." That was the closest thing to sorry I'd ever heard from him, and it wasn't even apology. It was negotiation language. A preface to a request. My mother's eyes flicked around my office. The diplomas, the shelves of legal books, the view. She swallowed, then said, "We heard you're doing well." There it was. Not "we're proud." Not "we're sorry." Not "we were wrong." Just, "you have resources." My father leaned forward. "We're older now. Things are difficult. We could use some help. Just to get back on our feet." And in my head, I saw it. 15-year-old me on the porch, no coat, no money, no phone. I felt something then. Not anger. Not triumph. Just clarity. I said, "You kicked me out at 15. My father's jaw tightened. "You were difficult." I smiled a little. I was a child. My mother tried to cry. Real tears or fake, I honestly couldn't tell. We did the best we could. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I said calmly, "No, you did what was easiest. And when I stopped being convenient, you threw me away." My father's voice got sharp. "After everything we did for you." I cut him off. "You mean the bare minimum you were legally required to do?" While reminding me I was adopted like it was a debt. They stared at me like they didn't recognize me, which was funny because I didn't recognize them either, not as parents. Just as two adults who had once shared a house with me. My mother reached across the desk like she could touch forgiveness out of me. "Please, we're family." I leaned back and said the sentence that had been building in me for years. "I don't have parents." My father's face twisted. "So that's it. You're going to abandon us." I blinked slowly. "You taught me how." Then I stood, walked to the door, opened it, and said, "My receptionist will escort you out." They left in silence, except my mother, who turned at the threshold and said, with this strange mixture of rage and shame, "You think you're better than us now." And I said, "Honestly, I don't think about you enough for that." After they were gone, I sat back down at my desk and waited for the big emotional collapse people expect in stories like this. It didn't come. Because here's the thing. I don't hate them. I don't forgive them either. I just don't care. They're not the center of my story anymore. They're a chapter one survived. Victor used to say, "Indifference is freedom." At the time, I didn't understand. Now I do. So yeah, that's my story. I was thrown out at 15. A strange, kind old man with a dangerous life gave me a couch, a rule book, and a ladder out. I climbed it. I became someone my adoptive parents can't bully anymore. And when they finally came back pretending they wanted forgiveness, what they really wanted was a retirement plan. I gave them the same thing they gave me on that porch. A closed door. Not out of revenge. out of peace.